Welcome to our Zoom worship service. We're going to begin our service this morning by acknowledging that the land on which our homes and our church were built was not uninhabited when European settlers arrived here with their ideas of conquest and ownership. For those of us who live in Moscow, Pullman, or other nearby communities, we live on the ancestral homelands of the Nimipu, called Nez Perce by the French-speaking traders, the Palouse, and the Shitshumsh, called the Coeur d'Alene. If you're joining us from another place, I encourage you to discover who inhabited or moved through the place where you now live in times before colonization and genocide, and explore where they are now. We pause and remember that we live on ground that is sacred, ground that was stolen, ground that cries out for justice and for responsible stewardship. May our remembering help us find the courage to do our part to restore wholeness to the earth and all her peoples. And now let's join our voices together for our words of welcome, the unison chalice lighting, and the sung affirmation. Whoever you are, wherever you've come from, whatever your beliefs, whomever you love, and however bumpy your life's journey, know that you are welcome here. We're hoping that everyone has a chalice or a candle to light and something to light it with. Let's light our chalices together.
We're the Thompsons. I'm Susan. This is Paul. And this is Michael. In the light of truth and warmth of love, we gather to seek and seek to share.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung in every land by every tongue.
So this morning, we are celebrating Epiphanies, and Epiphanies, small e, rather than the holiday of Epiphany, which comes on Wednesday of this week. There are two different understandings of the historical roots of the holiday Epiphany. Some Christians lift it up as the anniversary of the day the wise men arrived in Bethlehem, having followed the star. Others believe it's the day of Jesus's adult baptism. In both cases, the underlying meaning of the holiday of Epiphany is to remember and celebrate that Jesus of Nazareth was revealed as the Christ, as God incarnate. Now, Unitarian Universalists typically, but not always, have a pretty low Christology, which is to say, we believe Jesus was a special teacher and a worthy role model, but not necessarily more divine than anyone else. So in celebrating Epiphanies, small e, we might reimagine this holiday as a celebration of the moments when each of us learn or choose something that helps us move closer into alignment with our true purpose or our core goodness. Those moments when we're able to see ourselves and the world in a new way. Moments when old patterns shift or even shatter and new patterns glimmer on the horizon. In this time of great change, this in-between time when we know the vaccine is coming, but it's not really here yet, it feels valuable and worthwhile to me to reflect on the nature of Epiphanies, small e. Over the next few months, we might benefit from being a little more intentional about keeping our minds and hearts open and our ears and intuition tuned, so that when those epiphanies come, we can embrace them and accept the invitations they offer. But it's important to be gentle with epiphanies. They can be a little bit shy. So let's begin by singing In the Gentle of the Moon.
garnet of a star, feel the presence of a hope where the crowding shepherds are.
Soon the apple tree will bud, and the crimson fruit will fall, but within the stable shed, there's no thought of that at all.
Touch the treasure of a faith that the mythic Easterns hear. See the measure of a love come candescent down the air.
And now I invite you into a time of meditation. The process of learning and growing that we engage in as we become increasingly human, increasingly wise, that journey doesn't progress in a straight line. Wisdom comes in fits and starts in an ever widening, ever deepening spiral. Wisdom comes not just from our head, from our intelligence, but from our hearts and from something deeper, some innate and ever-present seat of deep peace and resilience that lives in every one of us, our birthright. We all have experienced flashes of insight, sudden realization, moments of clarity where before there had only been confusion, ideas that change everything. I invite you now to bring to mind one of those moments, an epiphany, a turning point in your own life journey. Remember what happened. Remember what you learned. Remember how you responded. Did you immediately shift and change and follow that star? Or did you resist? Did you argue? Did your epiphany burst into your awareness fully formed, or did it require time to take shape? Did you know at the outset where it was leading you? Or did you have to proceed on faith, knowing the next small thing to do, but not the ultimate destination? In the silence, gather all that you know, all that has been revealed to you about who you are and who you are becoming. Hold it close, ever so gently, and breathe. Let me see us clearly, take me home. Kingdom come, their will was done, and now the earth is far away from any kind of heaven. Hallowed be these frozen fields, and every single one of us still left in want of mercy. Take us home. Kingdom come, their will was done, and now the earth is far away from any kind of heaven. Hallowed be these frozen fields, and every single one of us still left in want of mercy. Take us home. Take us home. Take us home. Our reading this morning is by Jan Richardson. It comes from A Circle of Grace, a book of blessings for the season. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east come to Jerusalem. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. There is no reversing this road. The path that bore you here goes in one direction only, every step drawing you down a way by which you will not return. You thought arrival was everything, that your entire journey ended with kneeling in the place you had spent all to find. When you laid down your gift, release came with such ease, your treasure tumbling from your hands in awe and benediction. Now the knowledge of your leaving comes like a stone laid over your heart, the familiar path closed, and not even the solace of a star to guide your way. You will set out in fear, you will set out in dream, but you will set out by that other road that lies in shadow and in dark. We cannot show you the route that will take you home. That way is yours and will be found in the walking. But we tell you, you will wonder at how the light you thought you had left behind goes with you, spilling from your empty hands, shimmering beneath your homeward feet, illuminating the road with every step you take. So a few years ago, I did a service on inviting epiphanies, and I dove into the geeky brain science as I am wont to do. And just because I know you weren't all here then, and you probably don't all remember, and maybe aren't as interested in all this stuff as I am, but I'm going to share it with you again anyway. In cases of reported insight, gamma activity would spike about a third of a second before participants recorded their answers. So gamma activities indicates the formation of new neural pathways. So what's happening when we have an epiphany is new neural pathways are forming in our brain. At the same time, there was an increase in alpha waves in the right visual cortex, the part of our brain that controls our sight. So if you think about it, we tend to close our eyes or stare into space when we're working on a problem. And apparently a decrease in visual stimulus is part of the phenomenon that leads to epiphanies. And then I think this one is the coolest one. The brain decides a full 8 seconds before the flash of insight whether we're going to use a methodical approach to a problem or this alternate mode of being. So this in the study, people were given a puzzle, and those who solved the problem that they were given, the right frontal cortex began revving up the gamma waves and sending out the soothing alpha waves to the visual cortex without the brain's owner being consciously aware of it. So when we shift into that intuitive mode for the epiphanies, our whole brain sort of reconfigures itself. Now, what does all of this mean? It means that we're going to be more prone to flashes of insight, to epiphanies, if we give ourselves time to relax, to daydream, to drift, if we close our eyes, if we let go of control a little bit. We're also more likely to have epiphanies if we keep our brains supple. One of the things that they showed was that people who engage in new experiences, who regularly find new and different ways to challenge themselves, new tasks to master, who expose themselves to new ideas, those people are more likely to experience epiphanies and flashes of insights. So, the epiphanies don't come out of nowhere. They're new connections that our brains make between things that we already knew on some level. The study also suggests that if we want to have more insight, more moments of epiphany, that we should maintain a positive mood, because that has been shown to correlate with greater access to higher cognitive functions. And I just want to differentiate here between toxic positivity, which I'm not a fan of, that keep it on the surface and refuse to acknowledge challenges or negative emotions. So that's not the positive mood that we're talking about. We're talking about that grounded state that we're able to achieve when we reliably and diligently do our emotional work, when we feel our feelings, good and bad, when we process them, and when we come back again and again to our more grounded and centered self. So that's a quick review of the brain science that I shared with you a couple of years ago. Beyond the brain science, what is an epiphany when it comes to our spiritual lives? So the word epiphany was first used in Greek religion to indicate the appearance or manifestation of a god or a goddess in human form, along with the suggestion that the person or persons who had the epiphany would be delivered from danger and or their enemies would be defeated. So this ties into the incarnational theology that I talked about on Christmas Eve. So this incarnation of the divine that leads to deliverance from danger. So epiphanies are these insights that deliver us from dangers like losing ourselves, from dangers like going down a path that isn't good and real and authentic for us. Or they might be insights that defeat our internal enemies or demons, things like perfectionism, self-doubt, despair. Spiritual epiphanies are moments when something in us sees and recognizes something that is deeply true. And keep in mind that when we're talking about truth, there is no objective outside truth when it comes to the spiritual life. All truths that we find are somewhat adequate for now. Remember that little phrase, best we can do is somewhat adequate for me for now. So spiritual epiphanies are signposts. They're signposts on our individual wisdom journeys, signs that say this way, not that way. And they come in many forms. Sometimes an epiphany is triggered by a poem or a quote. Sometimes it's triggered when a person that we're with says something to us and it feels like those words are resonating through us, shaking us to the core. Have you had those kinds of moments? Sometimes epiphanies come in the form of that still small voice that whispers in our subconscious or in our hearts. Sometimes epiphanies even show up in dreams. But they're moments that change us, moments that transform us, moments that shake us loose from habitual ways of being human and invite us into a new way. Some epiphanies are quite subtle, very small. Some epiphanies are incredibly dramatic and change everything for us. So just as an example of an epiphany and how it came about and then what resulted from it, in 2010, I was participating in a program at Seattle University called the Pastoral Leadership Program. And the PLP, as we called it, was a program developed for folks who had been in ministry for somewhere between 5 and 7 years and who were coming to the edge of burnout. And the director of the program, when I interviewed for admission, I said to her, "I'm burnt to a crisp and I'm not sure I can be a minister anymore." And she said, "You are exactly who I designed this program for." And so I entered the program. And the epiphany that I want to share with you came a few months into the program. And there were things that were happening that supported this moment of epiphany. I was doing deep work in therapy, addressing old wounds, looking at a core sense of unlovableness that I had inherited from my parents, looking at that conviction that I had gotten, that had been ingrained in me as a child, that I have to be perfect in order to be safe. And I know you've heard me call myself a perfectionist in recovery before. So in therapy, I was doing really good and hard work. And then in class, we were also doing a lot of good work. And one thing in particular that really, I think, gave me the ground that I needed for this epiphany was a concept called the circle of grace. Now, a psychologist named Frank Lake did a study of missionaries, and he looked at missionaries who burnt out and missionaries who were able to sustain their work over years and decades. And I've talked about this before too, but it's worth revisiting periodically. So in the missionaries who experienced burnout, what he saw was a focus on achievement. So they focused on what they could achieve. And from their list of achievements, they developed a sense of significance. That sense of significance and importance provided them with sustenance, and that sense of sustenance helped them accept themselves. So their self-acceptance, their self-love, their self-compassion was all based on what they were able to accomplish and their sense of significance that developed through their list of accomplishments. And that is the cycle that led to burnout. The cycle of grace, the people who were able to keep going and remain productive, it went in the other direction, right? So their lives were grounded in a deep sense of acceptance, of belovedness, of self-compassion, of their own worth. And out of that sense that they mattered came the ability to be sustained in the work that they were doing in their lives. And then from the work that they were doing in their lives, sustained by that sense of being loved and their lives mattering, came whatever significance their work actually had. And from that came the list of achievements. So it went in the other direction. And then, so that's the circle of grace. And we had just been working on that in the weeks prior to my epiphany. And then the exact assignment that we were given on that day that my epiphany came was to memorize a poem and then to recite it to ourselves over and over again as we walked around the campus. And the poem that I chose was Mary Oliver's When I Am Among the Trees. And so I was reciting this poem to myself over and over again. And there came a moment where I was standing underneath a beautiful maple, looking up toward the sun. And I was at the place in the poem where it says, "You too have come into the world to do this, to be filled, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine." And those words kind of settled into my heart. They settled into my soul, and it felt like hundreds of pounds of weight slid off my shoulders. You too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine. And I can tell you that I would not be here with you today. I would not still be a minister if it hadn't been for that particular epiphany. And the epiphany led me into a new way of being human, a new way of working, a new way of interacting with the world, a new way of holding myself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't like I was one way before and different after. There's a certain amount of back and forth, and I have to keep reminding myself, moving forward into that epiphany over and over again whenever I start to drift back into that old way of being. But it was transformative and it changed everything. So that's my epiphany story. And my guess is that each and every one of us has an epiphany story, or two, or three, or 100, or 1,000. Life is made up of these kinds of moments. And that was the epiphany story I just shared. It was a good epiphany. It bloomed with joy. I want to acknowledge that sometimes they're not that way, that sometimes epiphanies are scary, sometimes they're hard, sometimes the epiphany points us in the direction of the unknown, and it can feel like leaping off a cliff with no safety net. And I also want to acknowledge, because epiphanies always include change always involves loss, and loss always includes grief. So epiphanies aren't always happy, shiny. There's some challenge in them as well. But it's worth thinking about how we hold them, how we welcome them, how we embrace them. I think about the story that Ryan shared with us, and how sometimes when an epiphany comes, when an idea comes, it seems strange and we try to walk away from it. But it tends to follow us, doesn't it? And I think about how sometimes an epiphany comes and we worry about what other people will think if we follow it, and so we hide it away, that little voice deep inside. And then when we do share our epiphany with others and they respond negatively, sometimes that causes us to shut away this new insight again and go back to those old habits, those old patterns. And often it takes a lot of time and a lot of nurturing for an epiphany to come to fruition. But if we engage in that practice of embracing and feeding and nurturing our epiphanies, welcoming them into our hearts, being ready, making ourselves ready for the change, then they do come to fruition. They grow wings and they change everything. So my questions are, can we receive epiphanies as a gift even when they're scary and hard? And can we hold them gently and patiently and lightly and allow them to grow and shift without too many expectations of outcome? And then when it's time for them to grow wings, can we launch them with all of our strength and courage? I think it's worth holding these questions and reflecting on epiphanies in this time, because it's a time of great upheaval. There are a lot of changes that are being asked of us and that will be asked of us as a species. We're dealing with climate change, hopefully the death of consumerism, hopefully the end of kyriarchy, that idea that some people are inherently better than others. There's a Kesha song that I sometimes listen to on repeat these days. It's got bad words in it, so if you're sensitive to that, I wouldn't recommend listening to it. But the refrain is, what if rich, white, straight men didn't rule the world anymore? Over and over again, what would happen if rich, white, straight men didn't rule the world anymore? I think that's what we're entering into. And it is a change, it's a shift. And these changes, the more we resist them, the more we and other people will suffer. So epiphanies are even more precious and important in these times than usual. And in my experience, they're coming with greater frequency. I think about this pandemic as sort of a species-wide epiphany. Because if it's proven anything, it's that we're capable of making huge changes really quickly, that we're capable of surviving and thriving, that as a species, as a people, we're more resilient than we know. Remember that poem by Lynn Unger, Imagine? I've read it to you before. I'm going to read it to you again. I read it every day, multiple times. I have it posted by my bathroom sink, and it's the poem that I read while I wash my hands. My poor hands that have been hamburger since March. Imagine with me for a moment. Don't worry, I'm not saying it's real. Imagine, if you can, that there's been not a calamity, but a great awakening. Pretend just for a moment that we all so loved our threatened Earth that we stopped going on cruises, limited international flights, and worked on cherishing the places where we already are. In this pretty fantasy, everyone who possibly can stops commuting, spends the extra time with their kids or pets or garden. We have the revelation that everyone needs healthcare, sick leave, steady work. It occurs to us that healthcare workers are heroes. Also, teachers. Not to mention the artists of all kinds who teach us resilience and joy. Imagine, if you will, that we turn to our neighbors in mutual aid, trading eggs for milk, checking in on those who are elderly or alone. Imagine that each of us felt suddenly called to wonder in this moment, what does the world need from me? What are my gifts? Yes, I know it's a fantasy. The world could never change so radically overnight. But imagine. This is a time that's ripe for epiphanies because the world did change radically and almost overnight. As heartbreaking and horrible as it is, COVID-19 can be understood as this collective epiphany. We realize together how fragile we are and how interconnected. We realize together how inadequate our structures of support and care are. And then the murder of George Floyd came as another epiphany, and it captured people's attention in a way I don't think it would have if we weren't all stuck at home. And so all of a sudden, people were wrestling with this legacy of structural racism, and there have been big shifts, big changes in response. I don't think anybody could have predicted 2 years ago that there would be a call to defund the police, that people would be talking about alternatives to standard policing, supporting social workers and crisis response units. It's changing, it's shifting, and it needs to. If we can embrace epiphanies in the weeks and months to come, we don't have to return to normal. We might just be able to return to better, to a society that's more just, to more robust networks of care and support, to a greater sense of interconnection and a greater ability in each of us to live into that interconnectedness. Might not be just the kyriarchy that we say goodbye to consumerism. It might be that myth of rugged individualism that has done so much harm to our lives and to our hearts. See, when we embrace epiphanies, there are these byproducts. There are these impacts that we find. And this is what I experience. The more I embrace epiphanies, the more I have the sense that the life I'm living is the life that's in me wanting to be lived. The more I embrace epiphanies, the more I have a sense of purpose and meaning, the more I feel fulfilled in my life. And that brings about joy. Deep joy, the kind that doesn't turn a blind eye to suffering, not false positivity, but the kind of joy that sees and feels everything, the full range of experiences. And when I embrace epiphanies, I find my way forward toward inner peace and a sense of satisfaction and rightness. I become more fully myself. I become wiser. I become better. And this is the path of spiritual epiphanies that we're all invited to travel together. Over time, as more and more people commit to this journey of spiritual transformation, these epiphanies might just grow and bloom and get out and be somehow in a way that's beyond words everywhere. these epiphanies might just change the world. So be it, and so may it be. Let's sing together now, We Three Kings.
We three kings, O Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. O star of wonder, star of light, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us through this perfect night. Frankincense to offer have I, incense owns a deity nigh, prayer and praising all are raising, worship God most high. O star of wonder, star of light, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us through this perfect night. Myrrh is mine, its bitter perfume breathes a life of gathering gloom. Sorrowing, sighing, bleeding, dying, sealed in the stone-cold tomb. O star of wonder, star of light, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us through this perfect night. Born a babe on Bethlehem's plain, gold I bring to crown him again. Love forever ceasing, never in our hearts to reign. O star of wonder, star of light, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us through this perfect night.
Our closing reading is another by Jan Richardson, again from A Circle of Grace. This one's for those who have far to travel, an Epiphany blessing. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Matthew chapter 2, verse 12. If you could see the journey whole, you might never undertake it, might never dare the first step that propels you from the place you have known toward the place you know not. Call it one of the mercies of the road, that we see it only by stages as it opens before us, as it comes into our keeping, step by single step. There is nothing for it but to go, and by our going take the vows the pilgrim takes, to be faithful to the next step, to rely on more than the map, to heed the signposts of intuition and dream, to follow the star that only you will recognize, to keep an open eye for the wonders that attend the path, to press on, beyond distractions, beyond fatigue, beyond what would tempt you from the way. There are vows that only you will know, the secret promises for your particular path, and the new ones you will need to make when the road is revealed by turns you could not have foreseen. Keep them, break them, make them again. Each promise becomes part of the path. Each choice creates the road that will take you to the place where at last you will kneel to offer the gift most needed, the gift that only you can give, before turning to go home by another way. Let's blow out our chalices together and say these words to embody the flame. We extinguish this chalice that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light our paths as we leave this place, and may it guide our way until we are together again. Here we go. I think we're in for a wild ride these next few months. And I am so grateful today and always that whatever may come, I won't be facing it alone, but in the very best of companies. A group of wise, loving, compassionate people who welcome and embrace epiphanies, who keep learning and growing and changing, and finding a way forward to a world that's worthy of our children. So go in peace and know that you too are held and a part of this beloved community, and that we're going to make it through together, whatever comes. Amen and blessed be.